Eyes of the Storm, a look at Billy's new photography exhibition. So in this video, I have included the audio commentary that complemented Billy's exhibition, alongside some photographs of pictures from the exhibition, some that came with the guide, some that I took, and also at the end, after I've listed all the people who were photographed in the collection, I include some of my thoughts as I walked around the exhibition.
I think the value of these pictures is historical. So I'm not setting out to be seen as a master photographer, although I think they're pretty good. I'm happy to just be thought of as an occasional photographer who happened to be in the right place at the right time. I have an archivist called Sarah Brown who works with me at our company, and she was mainly looking at the work and archiving the work of Linda. So one day during a meeting about Linda's photography, I happened to say to Sarah, hey, I took some pictures in the 60s. I wonder if we have them still. She said, yes, you do. She had relationships with a lot of galleries, including the National Portrait Gallery, where Mary had done some work. And she said they'd like to look at them. So it went from me rediscovering these old pictures to them looking at them, and they liked them. It was wonderful because it took me right back to the period and my relationships during that period with various people, the Beatles, my then girlfriend, Jane Asher, and other people who in my life at the time. So it was a surprise. It was a very warm surprise to go back so far in what were almost family snapshots of mine. Originally, we were just kicking around titles, and I thought Eye of the Storm, because just singular, because the Beatles were at the eye, in the eye of their own self-made storm. But as we looked at the pictures, I thought, well, it's more eyes of the storm, because there wasn't just one moment. There were plenty of moments when we were at the center of a storm. I mean, what you would do, you'd carry your camera around with you, and you would snap most of the pictures yourself. But if you were going to be, for instance, photographed by press photographers, you didn't want to have your camera there, so you would just give it to your road manager. So just sort of say, here, why don't you take a couple of pictures of this, us with the press photographers. So often you handed your camera off to someone who's standing nearby who wasn't going to be in the pictures, and just ask them if they would record this event for you. That was round about when we started to become well known. And I often say to people, one of the things that I think helped us was that we had a staircase to the stars. A lot of people these days are discovered, and overnight they're an international sensation because of social media and because of the internet. Then we were a nothing little group, and then we were a nothing little group in Hamburg, but we started to learn how to do it, learn more songs, learn how to entertain people. So when we got back to England, we could branch out, and we could now play larger places. We play in theatres. We could do TV work. So all these little steps on the staircase, I think, were very helpful, because each time you learned how to take a step, which made the next step easier. And it prepared you for the top of the staircase, which was to come. So those kind of things were beginning to happen. We were getting invited to be on television, and that, of course, increased your fame quite rapidly, because then particularly everyone watched television. On a Saturday night, you could be guaranteed that people would be sitting around watching their televisions. So our fame increased quite rapidly with that.
Hello, I'm Rosie Broadley, and I'm the curator of Paul McCartney Photographs, 1963 to 64, Eyes of the Storm. So the exhibition is made up of around 270 photographs by Paul McCartney, and they were taken in a very short period of time between October 1963 and February 1964. The key thing about this period is that they went from being sort of nationally famous, this is the very beginnings of Beatlemania, to being international sensations. And what's so special about these photographs is that they document that period, but from Paul McCartney's perspective. So the exhibition basically takes you on a personal journey, and it's almost like a visual diary. And they start in the UK on the Beatles autumn tour that started in October 1963. We stop off at the Christmas show that they did in London and Finsbury Park, and there's lots of very fun pictures of them backstage there. The Beatles heard that they were number one in America when they were in Paris, and so one part of the exhibition covers their period in Paris, where they were playing an 18-day season at the Olympia Theatre. Then the exhibition takes you to New York, through to Washington, and finally to Miami. The majority of the photographs in the show are black and white, taken by Paul on his Pentax camera with a 35mm black and white film. But when we reach Miami, he changes his film to colour, and actually it really feels like he's living the American dream. So for us at the gallery, the show is very much about Paul McCartney. It's about portraits, but it also represents a really astonishing moment, maybe in British and also international cultural history, where this little band from the north of England basically became the most famous people in the world. And, you know, their influence continues today.
We used to move around in our van, I think it was a Calmer van, and we had our equipment in the back, and we would be in the front with the driver, who was either Neil or Mal, or me and George, who had recently passed our driving tests, and we would fight for the keys to the van, because we both wanted to drive it. Anyway, we'd come down to London, and we loved it. It was the big city, it was London. We didn't know our way around, but those days you had maps, paper maps, which are fabulous. I think the thrill was stuff that we hadn't seen in Liverpool was here in London. So it was great. It was exciting. And having to find your way around was pretty exciting too. I think Brian Epstein, as our manager, will be approached by someone. Hey, you know, these Beatles are so popular. Could we stick them in a Christmas show? One of the shows that we have, the Billy J. Kramer show, there was a set piece, a piece of scenery that looked like a helicopter. And so they used sound effects. It was at Finsbury Park. And oh, the Beatles are arriving. Here they come. The set came down. And then it covered these steps that were at the back. So we just ran up, opened the door. Ah! And the Beatles are here. Yeah, you know. And we thought that was kind of quite good fun. I think George with the two hats is nice because it's a good portrait of George, and he's not hamming it up. He's just standing there with just happens to have two hats on. You get the sense that he's enjoying the joke, but he's playing it deadpan. So I like that photograph a lot. Drivers normally kind of showed up with the vehicle. It was like the guy who drove the vehicle was now he's your driver. We used to use an Austin Princess, which is like a down market version of a Rolls Royce, I think. So the four of us would get in the back and Bill would just be in the front. And we would just be having a laugh as he would drive us around places. And Bill was just a very confident sort of Cockney guy. And so we weren't going to take him. We said, no, we'll get a French driver because he can speak French. No, I speak French, don't worry. It turned out he didn't. But except for Can I Park Easy, which was fabulous. And the gendarme, oi, gendarme, come here. So, he made his way around. He was a blacker. He just blacked his way on the trip, and he blacked his way round Paris. But we were amused by him, and somebody like that who could make you laugh and drive you was a keeper. Ringo would say something strange, just like a malapropism. He'd just say something a bit different, and we'd jump on it. We'd pounce on it. He said, oh, God, I'm so tired. It's been a really hard day's night. Hard day's night, that's great. So that became our film title, And he would say these things. He said, well, tomorrow never knows. It's almost the right expression, but it isn't. So it becomes artistic. It takes on a sort of artistic quality that I say, if you notice it. So we did a song called Tomorrow Never Knows. And the thing I find now is they sound very sensible and part of the language now. Oh, they don't. Tomorrow Never Knows, yeah. They weren't quite right, though, anyway, and we pounced on them and used them. So that was half the fun.
I am Mary McCartney, and I'm a photographer, director, and cookbook author. I grew up thinking about photography because my mum was a photographer and my dad takes great pictures, and they're very interested in photography. So there would always be really great art books at home, or we would be taken to exhibitions at kids. And just really by osmosis, sort of seeing my mum with the camera on her shoulder most of the time or near to hand, sort of just observational pictures, that really sort of sparked an interest in me because it's very similar to the style that I like to take with my photography. My dad's exhibition has slightly blown my mind. There's so much of him in this. Apart from the photographs, he's been involved all along the way with the framing, the hanging, the lighting, the wall colours. So it's very personal, but also his photography is incredible. And I think it's very interesting because there's a lot of similarity between his photography style, my mum's photography style, and my photography style. So it's making me quite emotional being here because I can sort of see where my influence comes from. And I completely love taking photographs in the same way my dad and my mum did. It's a very authentic exhibition.
I've always been interested in images from the very first days when our family had a little box camera. When I went on holiday with my family to a holiday camp in Wales, in Pwllheli, Wales, I borrowed the camera for a day and just took some photographs for memories of that trip, which I enjoyed a lot. I would pose and ask my brother to take a picture of me outside the hot dog store, which, in England, you didn't really have hot dog stores. So it was an American influence. And so, yeah, we used the camera to take pictures of each other. And so from those very early days, I always enjoyed looking at good photography.
Hi, my name is Sarah Brown, and I'm the curator and photo editor at MPL, which is Paul McCartney's company. Back in late 2019, early 2020, Paul and I were working on one of his late wife, Linda McCartney's photography exhibitions. And he mentioned that he knew in the back of his mind he'd taken some photos in the 1960s when the Beatles were really taking off. So I went away and looked in our digital archive to see if I could find the photographs he was referring to, and I was pretty blown away to find over 1,000 photographs and original contact sheets. For someone who was new to using a 35mm SLR camera, as Paul was back then, they are brilliantly composed, they're stunning portraits that show humour, holiday snapshots, and I just couldn't get over the kind of artistic integrity of the images. Photography is definitely a big part of the McCartney family, I would say. From a young age, Paul and his brother Mike, they had a family box Brownie camera, and Paul reminisces that he used to love loading it with Kodak film when they went on their holidays to Butlins. And then from there, Mike also became a professional photographer and is very renowned for his pictures. And then to continue, in 1967, Paul met Linda while she was on a photography site in London to photograph the Beatles. They used to look at photo edits together to feature on Paul's album artwork, and then also it was in their own family life, which then inspired their own daughter, Mary McCartney, to become a photographer, and she's one of the world's leading contemporary photographers. I think the family have a deep love and respect for photography, not only as an art form, but as a way of self-expression, of capturing moments that interest them in an instant, but doing it with an artistic eye. One of the most exciting parts for me in working on the exhibition was seeing the negatives and the images from the contact sheets being blown up at the printers into beautiful fine art prints, and then getting to see them installed in the exhibition space on the wall really brought them to life. And I got such a buzz just seeing the evolution of sitting in our archive, looking at them with Paul, to being in the beautiful space of the National Portrait Gallery.
People became just your friends, just part of your family. So in the same way as you would with your family at breakfast, you could just ignore them. Just do your own thing like people do. And that was very special because we were doing something special. These people were special. One of them was a manager of the Beatles. This other guy is a famous photographer. But it didn't matter. So Robert, for instance, was asked to take a picture for an album cover. And so we were in, I think, Bournemouth at the time in a hotel. And he spied out a location. And then it was like, okay, guys, can I have half an hour of your time? We were, yeah, sure. And we all just went along this corridor to the end where there was a window. So there was natural light coming from this window. And he just arranged 2 chairs, I think it was. And we were sideways. The right-hand side of our face was towards the natural light from the window. And the other side was in shadow, the way he'd lit it and the way he set his camera to. So he just arranged us. And so that became this, I think it was with the Beatles. But it's a great shot. And people say, well, it must have taken me hours to set up. Well, no, it's like, I think about half an hour. He just sat us down, talked to us. And he did other things like that. We used Robert quite a few times. By the middle of the 60s, we had a freedom of so many things. Travel was one that our parents had never done. Money, which our parents never had. So you were free to buy a car. I was the first person in my particular branch of the family that ever had a car. People didn't have cars. They used public transport. So all these things were coming. So it was a new time. And so it was very exciting for us to be writing music and recording music again, our parents would have never done that. If they'd have taken photographs, it would be for the family snapshot album. But here were we taking photographs of a Miami cop or a Washington train ride or whatever, exciting events. It was a really exciting time when we were the vanguard of this new change, this vast change in society. So I don't think we should go to America till we've got a number one hit. And it was just a policy thing that I thought would be a great idea, because I knew we'd be coming in on a wave of success. If you get a number one, it's undeniable. So we waited, and we happened to be in the Georges V Hotel in Paris, and the telegram arrived from America, from Capitol Records to America. Attention, the Beatles. Congratulations, boys. Number one in the US. I want to hold your hand. We just screamed, jumped on each other, and we just ran around the hotel room and danced. And Mal, our roadie, was a big guy, so I remember jumping on his back, and it was a lot of fun. And here we were. This was the thing now. My little plan had worked. We were now number one. So now we said, now we can go to America. Go and get your visas. Go and get your stuff. And we did, and that was it. And it did work, because being number one obviously opened a lot of doors. So they could get us on Ed Sullivan's show, because we were the number one act in the whole of America. And if anyone was disparaging, we could say, yeah, but we're number one in your country. That was always a lovely thing, because we were definitely not standoffish. So people got the idea that you could mess around with us, you could have fun with us, and we would have fun with them, So this guy, the airport worker, anyone else might have thought, oh, well, there's just the guys come to fix the airplane or get it ready for takeoff. But, to me, they're like, hey. And the other thing is, being from the working classes, you'd relate to them. You definitely do relate to workers, because my family did that. I did that. You know that if someone notices you and you think they're okay, you can have a bit of fun with it. So that often happened with the photos that I was taking. I think it's a lucky image, because it's powerful. It says more than one thing. It says New York, skyscrapers. It says people running, people trying to catch up with our car, us escaping, us trying to outrun them. So it's very typical of the kind of thing that happened to us during that period. It's that pursuit that is really what put the Beatles in the middle of this storm. So all these people running, they are eyes of the storm. You would think it would be terrible. You'd think it'd be claustrophobic. You'd think it would be painful. And you'd think that you would feel like an animal in a cage. But I didn't. I can only speak for me, because this was something we wanted. So that when it happened, when there were crowds outside the Plaza Hotel and the mounted policemen were holding them back, this was like being in a very exciting film. Well, America was the big apple, was the big prize. It was where most of the music, if not all of the music that we loved, came from. So it was the home of everything we loved. The movies that we loved to watch. So many great things that we loved were American. And to us, it was the land of the free. I was always particularly struck by the phrase, "Give me your huddled masses," which is on the Statue of Liberty. And I must say, these days, I try and remind people of that when they're banging on about immigrants. I say, the whole place is immigrants, but beautiful immigrants who made a huge difference to the American cultural scene. And we picked it up in England, and we loved it. We'd love to hear these records. All the early rock and roll stuff was Americans. We had our own homegrown stars in Britain, but they were not as good as the imports from America. So you had, Elvis, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Fats Domino, endless people who were incredible and who were really exciting for us. As always, we traveled with our press corps, a bit like the president. You hear about Air Force One. So it was a bit like that for us, because the newspapers would send their correspondents hoping to get different angles, which they normally did. They could actually chat to us in off-duty moments. So there's a lot of that coming down in the train. And then we came to Washington and enjoyed just looking around the city. It had been snowing, which was nice. It's kind of, somehow, I don't know, it sort of lent a bit of character and excitement. I was pretty cold, but we were young. And you don't think about the cold when you're young. I was looking at the pictures, actually. I think nobody looks cold. In one of the British publications, the question had been, what's your favourite sweet? So this translated into America, what's your favourite candy? And we'd said, jelly babies, which we kind of liked. They were okay. But this became a big thing. And so all the fans would send us jelly babies. And obviously there's only so many you can eat before you go off them. At this gig, they started throwing them. So they're throwing them with little missiles, with kind of you having to dodge while you're playing. It was not great. And then they land on the stage. Now you're treading on them. It's like, oh my God. So after that, we put out the thing, we don't like jelly babies anymore. Really gone off, and please don't send them. We had to really make, emergency plea. And that's what I remember about the gig. But being in Washington was very nice.
It's hard to pick a favourite photograph in the exhibition. I have one in every city, but if I had to choose just one, I would choose the Unknown Girl portrait in Washington. I love everything about it, and the more I look at it, the more I see. Firstly, I think it's fantastically composed. When you watch videos from this time of the Beatles in America, first thing that strikes you is the overwhelming sound of fans screaming and chasing them, chasing their cars, and then the band members being kind of hurried and pushed into cars to get through crowds. Yet, when you look at this serene photograph, you wouldn't know that. Paul has taken the photo from inside a car. The door is slightly ajar. The windows framed a young girl. She is beautifully lit. It's almost chiaroscuro style. And she also returns photographer Paul his gaze. She's got half a smile, and what I like about that is it's not this screaming, kind of frantic smile that so many other photographers captured of Beatles fans at the time. She's just kind of implicitly looking at him as he is her. Also, the way the light hits her headscarf, it just is very serene, and it brings a peacefulness to the image that I find so compelling, especially when you know that what's surrounding the photo is a frenzied chaos. I also think this photograph shows how he saw and valued passers-by, the working person, a young woman or a young mother, and that he photographed them with the same respect and the same interest to any of the big stars he would have been rubbing shoulders with at the time. For me, there's a dignity in it. There's something that other photographers didn't capture at the time of teenage fans of the Beatles. They would make them look hysterical, but here we have an absolute peacefulness and serenity. And then the other aspect I think is great about this image are the glimpses into the 60s style and the fashion of the time, the well-cut coats and the cool sunglasses.
When we were down in Miami, I was in the car taking pictures of palm trees and the glamour of Miami when one of our police outriders pulls up right next to the car, and there, right in my face, with my camera lens, was his gun and his ammo. I just thought, God, this is so America. We'd never see this in England. So Miami was a burst of color. It was an exciting place to be. And, there are all sorts of exciting little things that would happen. You go to a hotel, and normally in hotels, if you're in a posh hotel, they supply you with a dressing gown, a robe, and it's made out of toweling. But in Miami, the little jackets, toweling jackets, yes, all those little things, were photographable. The color pictures start happening really when we get to Miami. And I like that aspect of the selection of pictures because it's like we were living in a black and white world on the rest of the tour. And suddenly we're in Wonderland, Florida, the sun, the swimming pools. We knew we were just going to a sunny resort for the Ed Sullivan Show. And the sun and the surf and all of that was the attraction. And we had some fabulous things happen. The British car company, MG, loaned us a car each. So suddenly each of us was driving an MG, go on a date in your MG, and at night to a drive-in movie. We'd never been to a drive-in movie ever before. So it was great. It was very exciting. And you're young enough to be totally impressed by it. There's no, jaded factor creeping in. All of that turned out to be the excitement of Miami. And doing the show was exciting too. But it's mainly what went around it.
In Miami, there's a real step change in that Paul changed the colour of the film that he was using. So throughout the whole exhibition, he's using black and white film in his 35mm Pentax camera, and possibly inspired by the sunshine in Miami, or that he just wanted to give colour film a try, he changes to colour, and then you step through into the room that's dedicated to Miami, and suddenly it's Technicolor. The skies are bright blue, they're on the beach, they're wearing shorts. It's completely different. You just feel sort of immersed in this amazing moment where these guys from Liverpool, who really didn't have a sense of what a place like Miami was like, they could envisage New York because they'd seen it on the movies, but Miami was a whole new experience for them. This kind of sunshine and the sea and the open-top cars and the sort of leisure, basically. They've been working really, really hard up until that point. So this is basically the first break they get during this whole period. And it's only a couple of days, but it looks like they're just having an amazing time and a proper holiday. They go on a boat trip, they go fishing, they're sitting by the pool, all the things that I think they imagined was the sort of American dream they get to experience. So what had happened was that they performed on Ed Sullivan in New York and then in Miami Beach. Those performances had introduced them to millions and millions of people. So the period in Miami where they're sort of relaxing, what's actually happened to them is that their whole lives have been completely transformed forever after. After Miami, they fly back to Britain. So it really marks the kind of coda to this American experience that they had. The Miami photographs are just so joyful. They bring a smile to your face. just to see how much fun they're having, and you kind of feel like they really deserve it because you know what they've done and all the performances they've done and how rigorous their schedule was and how hard they'd had to work to get to where that is. It's not just this 3-month period, it's actually years, years in Hamburg and in the Cavern Club in Liverpool. There's been a lot of work, and this moment in Miami you really feel is well deserved.
I think it's the same as it would be for anyone, that when you look at pictures of yourself younger, and in this case, quite a bit younger, there's a lot of emotions. I think one is, boy, didn't I look good? Well, we all looked young and beautiful. I'm very proud to have been through that period and to be able to have the luxury of capturing that period. When you look back and you think, wow, we did that, we did all of that, and we're just kids from Liverpool. There's every chance that we would have failed, but we didn't. And here it is in these photographs. Boy, how great does John look? How handsome is George? And how funny is Ringo, whatever, but wearing his funny French hat. I just like the positive aspects of these things.
So obviously the Beatles, Paul, Ringo, John, George, the actress Jane Asher, Paul's former girlfriend, her brother, a musician, Peter Asher, Neil Aspinall, the Beatles roadie and latterly the chief exec of Apple Corps, Tony Barrow, the Beatles press officer, Harry Benson, the press photographer who covered the Beatles story, the singer Cilla Black, the Beatles chauffeur Bill Corbett, the actress Dora Bryan, who issued a single called All I Want for Christmas is a Beatle in 1963, the Beatles manager Brian Epstein, the photographer Robert Freeman, who supplied the Beatles with the front cover images for With the Beatles, Hard Day's Night, Beatles for Sale, Help, and Rubber Soul. Then we have some of George's family, his father Harold, his mother Louise, and his sister, also Louise. We have the French singer Johnny Halliday, the British TV presenter for Jukebox Jury, David Jacobs, Peter J and the Jaywalkers, a British band signed to Decca in 1962. We have Michael Jones, better known as Mick Jones, the songwriter and guitarist who was in lots of different bands but better known for being a foreigner. The American radio DJ, Murray the K. The British harmony singing group, the Kestrels. The Beatles secretary, Frida Kelly, who was also the secretary for the Beatles Monthly. The singer Billy J. Kramer, who was signed to Parlophone by George Martin in 1963. John's first wife, Cynthia Lennon. Judy Lockhart Smith, who was George Martin's assistant at EMI, and also in 1966 she became his wife. The Beatles roadie Mel Evans, the Beatles producer George Martin, and then we have Paul's family, his dad Jim and his brother Mike, Ronnie Spector from the singing group the Ronettes, the Vernon Girls, who were another girl group signed to Decca in 1962, Sylvie Vartan, the French-Bulgarian singer, who was also signed to Decca in 1961, the sculptor David Wynne, who made heads of the Beatles in bronze when they toured in Paris in 1964, and the director of the Beatles Christmas show, Peter Yolland. Here are my thoughts about the exhibition. I deliberately didn't read any reviews about it because I didn't want to be influenced by them in any way. And when I went to the gallery, I was hoping, at the very least, to see the photography of the real Paul McCartney. Possibly I did, but not nearly enough or as much as I had hoped to. The first thing I noticed was that the styles and the quality of the shots varied wildly. Some of them could have been taken by an amateur, like Paul or someone else within the Beatles inner circle, but some of them were very definitely taken by professionals. Some of the photos I had seen before, and in fact, some of the images were quite famous. And that somewhat made a mockery of the whole concept, which was that a treasure trove of 1,000 photographs were discovered in the McCartney archives in 2020. And of that 1,000 images, only around a quarter of them made it to the gallery walls. So then the first question is, what happened to the other 3/4? Were they all outtakes in terms of their quality? Or perhaps did they tell a story that contradicted the official one? Of those photographs that maybe were authentic, they tended to be the ones that had a holiday snaps vibe to them, the ones that were taken in transit between locations. This was particularly true of the colour photographs at the end of the collection taken in Miami, where the Beatles basically went on holiday. And they were by the beach, they were out by a pool, they went fishing, they were in a speedboat, all these sorts of things. And some of those possibly were actually taken by Paul, but the collection subdivided into locations. So London, Paris, Washington, D.C., New York, and Miami were the main sections of the collection. And in each location, the photographs suffered from the same problem. There were too many photographs where the subject included Paul. And unless he was a very clever chap who learnt to bilocate, I'm not quite sure how he managed to take a photograph and also be in it. With the exceptions of the selfies that he took using a mirror, I'm not sure how else he was meant to take a photograph and be in a photograph. And Billy even says that, at some point he had to hand his camera off to somebody else. Well, then it's not a photograph by Paul McCartney, then, is it? By that logic. One of the other things I noticed was that despite the fact that the real Paul McCartney actually lived with the Ashes, there are very few photographs of them. There are only 3 of Jane. I think there's 1 of Peter. There are none of their parents, none of their sister Claire. There's 1 of Paul, actually, at the Ashes house. And that's about it. Considering how important they were to his life, why weren't they included? Perhaps we know why they weren't included. Because we all know why he was really living with the Ashes. It was part of the mind control program. Obviously, if there were pictures of the Ashes that might have reflected anything to do with the mind control programming that he was being subjected to, then clearly they weren't going to be included. But even just ordinary snaps, it just seemed weird that there weren't more of them, considering that he lived with them. The way that the display is arranged, most of the photographs are understandably in black and white. And at the end of the collection, the photographs that were taken in Miami, they burst into colour. And the effect sort of reminded me of the first time that I watched The Wizard of Oz, going from black and white into Technicolor. And in the audio guide, Billy even refers to it as, going to Wonderland, but it might as well be Oz. That definitely had a psychological effect on anyone wandering through that collection. We were being reminded that the Beatles had made it. This was Beatlemania. And I really got the impression that we were being reminded of how important that was. This was one last hit of propaganda. And that was also reflected in the demographics of the people who were actually at the exhibition. I went on the second day, and it was absolutely heaving with people, most of whom I think were probably old enough to have been children in the 1960s, or possibly the 70s, but mostly I would say children of the 1960s. I could tell just wandering around that there was an awful lot of nostalgia in that room. One of the other things I was trying to work out is whether any of these photographs were taken by Billy. I don't think they were, because in every interview I've listened to him talking about this exhibition, I get the impression he's just bluffing. There's no sense that he was even present when those photographs were being taken, never mind having taken them himself. And he doesn't really display any real emotional or intellectual connection to the photographs. He just feels like he's bluffing. And I also noticed on the audio guide that his daughter Mary got in on the act, talking about the style and how the style of the photographs that her father and her mother took was reflected in her own. But you know that that's so much nonsense, because these photographs in this collection were taken by many different people. And I can tell you that from the off. I would say there were lots of different styles, not one unified style. And in any case, some of the images, as I say, were quite famous images taken by other people. And the fact that they were even present in the collection made it feel like they were really trying to pad out the collection. Because despite there being a treasure trove of 1,000 photographs, I don't think there were nearly enough of the type that they were looking for, or maybe the quality that they were looking for. Another thing that Mary McCartney says on the audio commentary, and I quote, "My dad's exhibition has slightly blown my mind. There's so much of him in this, apart from the photographs." So he's very much involved apart from having taken the photographs, which he didn't. She doesn't say as well as the photographs, he's been involved all along the way with the framing, the hanging, the lighting, the colours, etc. She says, apart from the photographs. Nice touch. And then, of course, there's some of the things that Billy says in his audio commentary. That the story about the jelly babies, I think he actually stole from George. I think it was George that constantly got given jelly babies. I don't think it was the entire band. I could be wrong about that, but I think that was actually George Harrison. The story about the Beatles chauffeur Bill Corbett, I thought was possibly an opportunity for Billy to say two things at once. He talks about Bill being a blagger, and he could frankly have been talking about himself. The last couple of things I noticed that he mentioned immigration, which is a hot topic, and also gun law. Now, I understand why he said what he said to a point. As a Brit, I've grown up in a country that, by and large, doesn't have guns. And I know I've only ever been to America once, and the one time I did go, it did cross my mind that I was so much more likely to be shot there. But then back home, I'm so much more likely to be stabbed. So 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. So anyway, those are my thoughts about the exhibition. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.